Penny, thank you for being here. Let's say a little bit about you. This is from her vita, where she let me know that she was born in Rocky Mount, along with her sister Ruby over here, I'm sure, right? So, and I don't know, I forgot that you'd walked out, so I was asking her to sign your book. And I told her that my brother and I used to get by with that a lot too.
It's a wonder she didn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, but then you would have shown back up, and I would have been like, what? Anyways, I'm really glad you're here, is what I'm trying to say. And so they were together, they were raised over at Union Hall on what was then a tobacco farm. I don't know what it is today, but it was then a tobacco farm. And she went on to graduate from Hampton University, obtained a degree in mathematics, and earned her MBA from Duke University, and went on to work and then eventually retire from IBM Corporation as a delivery project executive. In coming back home, she wrote partially. I'm not sure what that meant, but I'll say in coming back home to help care for their dad, who was 95 at the time, and I'll let you clarify what coming back home partially means. She developed the idea for writing this book with her father as the protagonist. It was published in February of 2020, just prior to the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent worldwide protests that followed. As we celebrate Black History Month in America and here in Roanoke, her talk is timely, relevant, and local to our region. She wrote of this book that it is a book of history, the history of America that helped shape my ancestors and father's environments, along with my father's stories of protest that helped shape mine and my siblings' lives. With that, I'd like to introduce Penny Blue.
Thank you all so much, and especially for coming out this evening. And I wasn't the only one that came from Union Hall. Susan is also from Union Hall. So yes, the title of my book is A Time to Protest, Leadership Lessons from My Father, who survived the segregated South for 99 years. So he lived to be 7 weeks shy of 100 years old. I'll introduce myself a little first. Stephen shared with you my background. So that's, I own a company called Pennywise Gateway where I do trainings and with regard to project management and leadership training, and of course IBM, Hampton, and Duke. But then this side over here is the things that I enjoy doing. I have been a lover of history since grade school. I used to love the stories about the kings and the queens and all those types of things. And I fell in love with African American history when I went to Hampton University. Even though I was a math major, I took my electives in Black history and those types of things. This is me. When I came back home, I volunteered over at Booker T. Washington National Monument, and I helped start the Friends of Booker T. Washington National Monument, but I also did portrayals of Jane, which was Booker T's mother. And I have the flag in the little schoolhouse here because I was on the school board for 8 years, 2 terms. I lost in 2021 when all the folks were coming to the school board protesting all sorts of things that the school board really had no control over, but that's another story. And I have the American flag here because one of the things I was able to do toward the end of my last year on the board was to get into the Franklin County school system's dress code that children could not wear or carry the Confederate flag to school, which was a bit of a battle. Oh, and my sister here is Ruby Penn. She'll probably interject some today or this evening while we're talking, and I even have a story with regard about her that I'm going to share tonight. So this was published in March of 2020, just before all the protests from George Floyd, and I just find it ironic because the title of my book is called A Time to Protest, and that's because, as Stephen said, when I came home and worked with my dad came to live with me for a while, my dad used to tell us stories all the time. He was a great storyteller. And I said, well, I need to capture all of his stories. and publish them. So I set them down, and one of my sisters and I, we had him retell the different stories, and of course we've heard the stories a million times, so we knew the stories, and made certain we got them documented correctly. So we did that, and I put them together. I said, well, this is really not large enough for a book, plus it sort of doesn't make sense unless I contextualize it. So contextualizing it meant putting history around it so that it could have a meaning. And then once I was finished, and I was looking for a title, I said, this is what he was doing. They were all stories of protest. Didn't really realize that when I was growing up, but they were all stories of protest. And so I took a time to protest. As you all know, in the Bible it says there's a time for everything, and so that's where I got the time for a time to protest from. So why did I write it? Because it's about stories about everyday black people. Like we hear about the Martin Luther Kings and the Malcolm X's and those type of people, which they were very critical and important. But it's also about the everyday person that really helps to create history. And even with the movement with regard to civil rights or freeing ourselves from slavery and etc., it also took that everyday person. And the other reason is because a lot of people think that Jim Crow and slavery was 1,000,000 years ago. It was yesterday. And I'm going to share that with you with regard to, because I'm going to talk about my parents and my grandparents and the time frame that they lived. And of course the impact that my dad's stories had on his children. I always tell people that if you have any siblings, you know that sometimes you wonder, did they really grow up in the same house I grew up in? You know, did they really have the same parents? I ask that question myself. But the reason I know that the other 9 souls that are walking this earth are my siblings is because 2 things. One, we work, and we work well. And if we have a job to do, it gets done. That's one. And that's part of growing up on a farm. And 2 is that we don't believe that anybody has walked this earth better than us, other than Jesus Christ. And so one of the things that I've learned since I've been doing this presentation is, you know, you have to be taught how to be a slave, and you have to be taught how to be a second-class citizen. And the reason I get in trouble, and my siblings get in trouble, is because we were never taught how to be second-class citizens. So that's a problem for white people and black people, because people, quote-unquote, have their places, and we don't fit into the places that people think we should. And of course, also for young people. And I love this quote. It says, history is who we are and why we are the way that we are. Some quotes. I love this from Frederick Douglass. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. And of course, that really says something to me because, again, I grew up on a farm. And if you want to eat, you have to plow the ground, you have to plant the seeds, you have to water the seeds, you have to take care of it. And many people sit back and think someone else is going to do something for them, such as free them or protest and etc., etc. But you basically have to do it for yourself. And through history, our history teaches us that, you know, black people sit back and didn't, but actually black people did do it for themselves with the help of other people, but they led the way in freeing themselves. And I think that's important for people to know now, because a lot of people sit back and think it's going to just happen. And I always share, as much as I love history, I have never read in any history book where a king or queen said, I'm tired of being king or queen. I'm going to let you be the king. And I'm going to go out and be the president. It doesn't happen like that. And this is how I know the legacy continues, because my great nephew, Makai Sincere Edwards, he's 17 now, but when he was about 6 or 7 years old, he was sitting in the back of a car, and my 2 sisters were sitting up front talking, and of course they weren't paying any attention to him in the back. And based on their conversation, he rose up and he says, We stand up for ourselves even if we stand alone. That's how I know my dad's legacy continues. One of the titles of my chapters is Who You Are and Whose You Are. I truly believe you have to know who you are and whose you are, and that's part of what sustains me. Because there are people that will try to define you every day, all the time. But if you know who you are and whose you are, then you won't allow anyone else to define you. And when you know the one and only Master created us, when you know you belong to the Master of the universe and know who you are, you refuse to let anyone else define or subjugate you. And those are words that I live by on a daily basis. Repeating history. This is the same symbol of the Sankofa bird, and it's one of my favorite symbols. It's an African symbol, and it basically is the Sankofa bird looks behind while flying forward so that the past might inform the future journey. Because we all know that if you don't know your history, you repeat your history. I coined this term in my book. It's called blacklash instead of backlash because, can I? Yeah, if you don't mind. It's a sudden, violent backward movement or reaction with the intent to setting black people back. Because what you'll find throughout history in the United States, anytime black people make a huge step forward, there's a backlash. People get upset and push it back. Even when they make little small steps, then there are laws coming into place. Even with slavery and that time frame. And I'll talk a little more about it, but basically, it's the power structures. The power structures game book is about cheap labor and to separate and placate. And I'll share with you why I'm saying that. So, some historical large blacklashes are this. Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion happened during the colonial time in Williamsburg, Virginia. And of course the governor was put here by England, and they were ruling the colonies. Well, Bacon got upset, and he gathered the poor farmers, white, black, indentured servants, and slaves, because all these people used to communicate, sleep together, work together. It was fine. But once they did Bacon's Rebellion and overthrew the governor's mansion, and England came and put down the fight, they said, we can't let this happen again. So that's when they separated and told the poor farmers, white people can be indentured servants and you're poor farmers, but you're better because only the Africans are going to be the slaves, and we need to separate. You all can't talk to each other, you can't marry, so it's about separation and placating. Then we go to the Civil War. Civil War ended in April 1865. By December 1865, the KKK had formed in Tennessee. Reconstruction and Jim Crow. After the Civil War, there was Reconstruction period about 7 to 12 years, and we had the federal troops in the South to protect the black people, and black people were making a lot of progress. They were getting elected to office, they were voting, etc., etc. Many people in the South were upset, white people, and in 1876 there was an election, and there was a debate about who won. So they did a compromise 1877, and basically said the agreement was they would allow the Republican to be the president if they would pull the troops out of the South, and that's brought in Jim Crow. And of course Jim Crow is the black, white, colored thing, and etc. Modern civil rights, 1865. Most of you all are more aware of 1864, 1865 Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act. And during this period, there was a lot of progress, but the black lash is what I call James Crow Esquire. I'll explain what that means in a minute, but basically it's just a more sophisticated Jim Crow. Jim Crow, you got the white and colored signs, very visible. James Crow Esquire is same thing, except it's a little more sophisticated with regard to trying to fight it. And of course then President Obama was elected in 2008, and now we have number 45. And it's basically, he is a black lash from President Obama. When he was running for office, I was actually on the school board, and we have state meetings, and we had a state meeting in Richmond in the February time frame. And there's a gentleman there that always gives a State of the Union and a State of the State. And we were in a Marriott large ballroom, so about 200 to 300 people. And he asked how many people think that Trump is going to win the primary. This is in February. Maybe 3, 4, or 5 people raised their hand, and I was one of them. And so after the meeting, we were having hors d'oeuvres and drinks, and my superintendent of the school said, he can't win, he's not going to win. I bet him a dinner that Trump was going to win. And how did I know? Because I know my history. And it was a black lash. Actually, the last couple of years when President Obama was in office, I was like, please get somewhere and sit down so these people can calm down. So, again, when you know your history, it allows you to see current events more clearly and respond in a more definitive and appropriate manner. The United States. Is the United States about humanity, citizenship, and equality, or is it about power, wealth, and cheap labor? I say it's about power, wealth, and cheap labor. Because basically since 1619, when the first Africans, 20+ Africans came to Virginia, all we have ever wanted is to be treated like human beings. Be a citizen. Be treated equally. Is that too much to ask? I mean, that's what every human being wants. But there have always been obstructions. And the obstructions are the power structure, the economic structure, and law enforcement. And why do I say that? Because the power structure is your government and your laws throughout. The economic structure was enslavement, then Jim Crow, and what I'm calling James Crow Esquire. The enforcers were the masters and the patty rollers. Then it was the police, the KKK, and everyday citizens. And now the police, militia, and white nationalists. And so that's basically a timeline of the story of African Americans in the United States. The 13th Amendment provides a historic context for racial profile and police brutality and etc. because that amendment basically prohibited slavery or servitude except for as punishment for a crime. And they've been locking up black men ever since. The United States is only 5% of the world's population. Yet we're 25% of the world's prison population. And why is that? I mean, we're one of the most sophisticated countries in the world, right? But we lock up 25% of our citizens, and we're only 5%. We lock up 25% of the world's prison population, but we're only 5% of that population. And who is behind bars? African American men and Latino men. And women, but mostly men. So now I want to share a little bit about my family tree. So how does this impact individuals? Emancipation, 1865, based on the brutal Civil War. My paternal great-great-grandparents, Sam Maddox, born 1804 to 1896, he was an owner, and he lived in Union Hall, where I currently live. And my great-great-grandmother was Sally Ann. She was his slave, and she was listed in the 1870 census, this is the first time a lot of black people were ever listed in the census as a servant of his. They, their child was Charles Maddox, who was my great-grandfather. And he was born 1846 and passed away 1928 and married Lucy Ann Dunnings. Lucy Ann Dunnings was part of the free colored people in Rocky Mount, Virginia. And then my other two great-grandparents was Abram Edwards and Fanny Dickerson. And you see their time frames. They were listed in the 1870 census, and they lived in a house with about 25 other people. And they didn't list any relation about them, but I'm assuming they all lived in a house together in order to make it. Because again, like I share with children, I'm the master, you all are the enslaved. I'm putting you to work today. When you come home, I want all your money. You go out and work tomorrow. When you come home, I want all your money. I'm going to do this for 400 years. Oh, guess what? Now y'all free. But I'm keeping all the money. Get it the best way you can. That's why 25 people have to live in one house in order to make it. Not only do I get to keep all the money, the government pays some of us because they took our slaves away. So we don't give the slaves any reparations, but we give the owners reparations. And during this time of Reconstruction, from 1865 to 1876, about 2,000 black people were lynched. So, one of the first stories that my dad would tell us about was Grandpa Charles. And of course, Grandpa Charles was the mulatto that was the son of Sam Maddox, the master, and Sally Ann, the enslaved. And so the first story was on page 27. And it's called The Land Inheritance Story. Sam Maddox shared with Charles that he was leaving him some land. However, when he showed Charles the land he was leaving each of his sons, Ples and Dent's land was nice and flat. The land he was leaving to Charles was in a hollow. Once seeing the land, Charles told his dad not to bother. Charles told him to keep his land, and he would work and buy his own freaking land. But they didn't say freaking land. So Jim Crow era, 1865 to 1965. My grandparents that lived in Union Hall. Edmund King Edwards, 1886 1960. Sally Roberta Maddox. And what I want you to look at here are these dates. My grandfather lived his entire life during Jim Crow. His entire life. My grandfather during Jim Crow. And my grandmother lived basically her entire life except for the last several years, which of course she was an older lady by then. And Plessy versus Ferguson was 1896, which basically said separate but equal was fine. And from 1877 to 1950, over 4,500 black people were documented as being lynched. And I say documented because you know there were probably lynchings that weren't documented. And the headquarters of the NAACP was in New York. And they would put a sign out every day that a black man was lynched. That sign went out every other day. And I share with people, you know, how we as people now, I mean, there's a shooting, a mass shooting every day, you know, and people are concerned of going here, going, well, this is like a mass shooting every other day. This is the Jim Crow era, and I depict all of this to show all the things that were going on in black people's lives during this time, lawfully going on in black people's lives. So you had the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment, but I just shared with you what the 13th Amendment did for us. Then you had the 14th Amendment, which gave black men the right to vote, but then over here they had grandfather clauses, literacy tests, all white primaries, which basically like we have primaries today, and that's kind of determines who gets to run. Well, the only people that could vote in the primaries were the white people, so they elected selected the person that everybody could vote for. Then you had poll, prison laws, voting roll purges, and property tests. President Kennedy was assassinated at the end of this. I have the GI Bill. Most people think the GI Bill is good, and it is good for white people. White people were able to get the GI Bill, utilize it, build homes, get into the middle class. Black people did not get to participate in this GI Bill. This is the time frame that Confederate statues were raised, just to make certain everybody knew where everybody's place was. Even though people, I have, where is it, the Great Migration. A lot of black people left the South, going north for better. I had no idea until I read this book called The Warmth of Other Suns. They had to run from the South. They had to sneak away because you worked on, well, I won't call it, you worked on farms. And if I decide you weren't paying me enough and I could get a better deal over here and I go here, you could come and whip me or kill me and there's nothing I could do about it. And so these people had to sneak away in the middle of the night, leave their stuff or sell their stuff. And it's interesting, a lot of the places, like, they went along the train route, like for instance, Mississippi train may have gone to New York. So a lot of people from Mississippi ended up in New York, and etc. And of course you had the vagrancy laws. That's when right after the Civil War, there's a thing in the order that was read to the enslaved to let them know that they were free. But they were also told that they couldn't linger around or be vagrants. And so of course if I didn't want to work for you or tried to work for you and you didn't want me to work for you or what have you, they arrested me for not working and put me on a chain gang for government work and whippings and mutilations of the KKK. I show this just to show all the things that were going on during this time. When I say all, this is very few, because I can't get them all up here on the screen. But just an example, in 1866, Memphis, Tennessee, 45 dead, 5 raped, 285 injured because of political and social economic issues, people trying to make progress. Here, 1866 in New Orleans, 150 wounded, 50 to 200 dead. Some folks here trying to vote, again, 40 dead, over 100 wounded. Vicksburg, Mississippi. And people think that the insurrection in Washington, D.C. on January 6th was the first time. Wilmington, North Carolina has even a statue now that they've erected because of the insurrection in North Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina. They had blacks that had been elected to city or county positions. People were upset. They killed some, ran the rest out of town. Atlanta, Georgia. So these things were going on all over the United States during this time. So now I want to share with you Grandpa Edmund's story, where he says, I can buy my own. This is page 31. So this was my grandfather. And remember I said he lived his entire life doing Jim Crow. So this is called I Can Buy My Own. My paternal grandfather, Edmund King Edwards, lived on a white man's farm where he worked. When he was 18, the white man told him that if he stayed on with them and worked hard, when he turned 21, they would give him a horse and a saddle. My grandfather told the farmer, if I work hard for myself when I turn 21, I can buy my own horse and saddles. My grandfather ended up buying 100 acres in Union Hall, Virginia, and that land is still in our family today. I have a brother that owns 40 acres of it and a nephew that owns the other 60 acres. Jim Crow, again, 1865, it lasted 100 years. My father, Charles Abram Edwards Sr., and my mother, Helen Marie Holliday Edwards. And I want you to look at their time frames. They lived half of their life doing Jim Crow. I remember once, I don't know why I remember this, but my mom and I went to Leggett's, and this is when you buy a pair of shoes and you get another pair for a penny, and I got these red kids. I loved them. And we bought them. And I didn't realize till now, that was the norm for me. But it wasn't the norm for her. I was probably one of the first of her children that she was able to take into stores and to try on shoes. So it was a big deal. 1877 and 1950, over 4,500 people were lynched. And 1952 was the first full year there were no recorded lynchings. By 1952, my parents had 8 children that they had to be concerned about. Well, actually 7 children they had to be concerned about. In 1955 was when my 8th sibling was born. And that's when Emmett Till was tortured and murdered in Mississippi. So during this period, again, can't put them all up. It's too many. I would be here all night of all the things that were going on across the country. But many people have heard of Tulsa, the race massacre. And they think that's a one-off. It's not a one-off. Those types of things were happening all across America. Rosewood, Florida, there's a movie out about that. 1919 was Red Summer because black men were coming home from the war in their uniform. Folks didn't like it. They lynched them in their uniforms. So this is James Crow Esquire. So you don't have the colored signs and the white signs anymore, but JFK was assassinated, Malcolm X was assassinated, Martin Luther King was assassinated, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, there was a Black Panther raid in '69, white supremacists, revisionist history, the history that we learned, integration, 1954, but Virginia had mass resistance. Basically, if any white school tried to integrate, then they would shut off the funds. Racial biases, corporate prisons, which we still have today. So if I have a company, I need people to work, don't I? Well, if it's a corporate prison, you need bodies in there to work. And some of these bodies make between 2 and 20 cents an hour. Angola is a prison in New Orleans, and 80% of the prisoners are black. Well, it's all men, so black men. And the crazy part is, it's a prison now, and it used to be a plantation. So it's still serving the same purpose. Systemic racism, the 3-strike law, the city projects, white flight, environmental racism, the drug culture, voter suppression, HBCU, historically black colleges and universities, underfunding, affirmative action, urban renewal, regentrification. So this is what I call James Crow Esquire. A little more sophisticated, doing the same thing. So here are my dad's stories. This one's called The Hub. And if any of you all have been to Franklin County, Rocky Mount, the Hub still exists on Main Street. And page 61. Sorry. Dad and a number of black men in Union Hall carpooled together to work at Bassett Furniture Company in Bassett, Virginia. Many times they would stop at the Hub restaurant, a local restaurant in Rocky Mount. The restaurant was a whites-only restaurant, which means they only served whites in the dining room. They would take black folks' money, but the blacks had to go around the back and order their food to go. When the men stopped to eat at the Hub, my dad always remained in the car waiting on them. During one of those stops, Dad became angry at the very thought of being treated like a second-class citizen. A cab pulled up, and Dad asked the cab if he had a fare, and the man said no. Dad told the cab driver to take him to Union Hall. He would rather spend the money to go back home than sit around waiting for his friends to get a meal served around back because of the color of their skin. And I assure you, my dad did not have any money to spare with 8 kids at home, but this was part of his value system. He and my mom did not frequent places that were segregated, and he did not allow his children to frequent places that were segregated. The Micah backstory, it's so many interesting stories in here that it's always hard for me to choose which ones to share, but this one's a little funny. This is called Mick and Mac, and I'm sure most of you all remember the Mick and Mac store, grocery store. Mom and Dad were coming in from West Virginia and were tired. They stopped at the Mick and Mac to buy some chickens so that they would not have to kill and dress the chickens so that they could eat when they got home. The butcher prepared a couple of chickens for them, and Mom and Dad had the chickens in their basket. My mom then saw a steak she wanted. Dad asked the butcher for a steak. The butcher reached for a dark, dried up looking steak. Mom says, "Oh no, I don't want that one, I want that one," and pointed to a nice red steak. The butcher said, "If you don't want this one, then you don't want none." Dad threw the chickens back up on the counter and said, "No, we don't, and we don't want the chickens either." Mom and Dad then walked out of the store and continued home. I usually say those, but since I'm in church, I just can't say them. And this is the story about Ruby, page 104. It's called Clayton's. My sister Ruby had a speech impediment, so at the age of 5, my parents sent her to Ephesus to help her with her impediment. The teacher decided, and this was a one-room school that was like right by, wasn't too far from our house. The teacher decided to take the students on a field trip, walking one day to a local gas station / country store. Clayton's was about a half a mile from our house. At the time, all of the local stores were called by the owner's first name. In Union Hall, there was Clayton's, Pasley's, Harry's, and Joe Billy's. Clayton was only a half a mile from our home. The other 3 stores were about a mile from our home. Clayton's was Jim Crow. They had signs for entry into the store that read white and colored. Therefore, my parents did not frequent that store and did not allow us to frequent the store. The teacher and the students had to pass by our house to make it to Clayton's. Dad happened to be in the backyard. Of course, he asked them where they were headed. The teacher informed him that they were taking a field trip and walking to Clayton's. He explained that Ruby was not allowed to go to that store and why, and that she could stay there at the house until they returned. When the class returned, Ruby was allowed to go back to school, and the teacher bought Ruby some cake. That's Miss Ruby over there. And of course she cried, and Dad had to sit her down and share with her why she couldn't go. And this is my last story, page 109, and it's called Integrating the Wheat Thrashing. If there's still a wheat, okay. In the 1940s and 1950s, Dad and Grandpa worked closely together day to day, working on their farms. Annually, a number of farmers, both black and white in the community, worked together to thrash each other's wheat. This allowed them to utilize the equipment owned by a couple of them and provide the manpower each farmer needed without having to hire the manpower required to thrash the wheat. The couple of white men that owned the equipment set the round-robin schedule for going from farm to farm to thrash each farmer's wheat. The farmer's wife, whose farm they worked each day, was responsible for preparing the lunch for all the farmers. The men would start the wheat thrashing early in the morning, break for lunch, and then continue to work after lunch. Both Dad and Grandpa participated in these workings. Of course, during this time in the South, the Jim Crow laws did not allow blacks and whites to eat in restaurants together, and this mindset spilled over into the non-commercial environments. When the farmers came in for lunch, the white farmers ate first. Once the white farmers finished eating, the black farmers were allowed to eat. This was true in both the black and white farmers' homes. Dad talked with all the black farmers and told them it was ridiculous for them to allow the white men to go into their homes and eat at their tables before they ate. Dad let them know when they got to his house that year, all the farmers were going to eat at the same time. All the black farmers were in agreement. When they got to Dad's farm, he had everybody eat at the same time. Dad had an older black farmer sit at the head of the table and turn the grace. He then winked his eye at Daddy. Everything went smoothly as planned. Once the farmers finished eating, they returned to work and completed the round-robin style of visiting the farms. The following year, all the farmers got back together to thrash wheat. When it came close to our farm, they had not announced whose farm they were going to next. So Dad asked if they were going to his farm next or another black farmer. They always needed a little advance notice so that the wives could plan to prepare the lunch. The first man Dad asked said the other white man was in charge and for Dad to ask him. Dad approached and asked him. The man replied, "Well, Charles, I don't think we're going to thrash your wheat this year. Last year when we went to your house, you fed the black and the white together." Dad then said, "If all I ever lose is a field of wheat, I'll be a rich man." He then threw down his pitchfork and walked off. Grandpa threw down his pitchfork and followed. All the other farmers stayed and continued the round-robin farm visits along with lunch as they had been doing in the past. Wow. And when I do this with children, I ask them, what would have happened if all the black farmers had walked off? Could have been positive. Or, why didn't they? They were afraid. KKK, all those types of things. But I truly believe you have to act like a first-class citizen in order to be treated like a first-class citizen. The election of the first black president of the United States. I came home in 2007. My dad moved in with me. Of course, Barack Obama was running for president in 2008. I'm one of those people. I cut off the TV at night. My dad and I both had both our TVs on 24/7 CNN all the time. And he would be sitting around. I would just like to shake his hand. 10 minutes later, I would just like to shake. He thought Barack Obama was so smart. 30 minutes, I would just like to shake his hand. So I was working the campaign in Franklin County, and Barack Obama was coming to Bristol, Virginia, and I got 7 VIP tickets. So with those tickets, I gave them to 3 of my sisters, a brother, and my dad. So we pack up, go to Bristol. Of course, it's a 3-hour drive, so we gonna have food and all that kind of good stuff. So we get there, and of course, well, it was very hot that day. So Ruby takes Dad up to the front and asks, and he's got a cane, asking, can they go inside and sit? And so they let him go inside and sit, and Ruby saves us our seats. So when we get in there, we are sitting, and then in comes Barack Obama. Everybody goes crazy. Everybody's trying to get a touch and all that kind of good stuff. We go back, and of course we tell Ruby, or some of us touched her. Ruby meant that she was not going to ride back 3 hours with all of us in a car, and some of us had touched Barack Obama, and she had not. So, and then we were like, well, we can't, Dad was 95 at the time. We can't get him through a crowd to shake his hand. So we got to come up with a plan. So the first plan was, we'd been watching the town halls, and we knew if we said we love you, he'd say I love you back. I said, so the best time is just when everybody gets quiet, and when he starts to speak, we all stand up, and we all had on black t-shirts that had the dream and the dreamer, which were Martin Luther King and Barack. So we all stood and said, we love you, and I love you back. We were like, oh my God, this is it. This is it. So then we're like, well, how can we get Daddy up there to shake his hand? So another one of my sisters said, well, he's got this cane. Let's tell him that this is a gift for him. So we said, oh, good. So when we do the Q&A, we'll all stand up and raise our hands, and he's got to call on one of us, and we'll tell him that Daddy has a gift for him. So we all doing this, and of course he points, and everybody's still fussing about who he called on, but I know he called on me, so I responded. And I said, I have my 95-year-old dad here with me today. And the whole gym went up in a roar. We weren't expecting that. And I said, and so he has a gift for you. So the Secret Service and everybody said, okay, so they go down. And of course, this is Ruby. this is my brother Ronnie, and that's another sister. And he gifts Obama the cane. And Barack says, yeah, this will help me out, because if the Congress doesn't want to pass the health bill, I tell them I'll whoop them. You know, that type of thing. So he joked and everything. Then we go back, and you know, he would always go boy, girl for the questions. And so he went, I think girl. They said, no, it's boy time. He says, oh no, she was just tricking for her daddy. So we were satisfied. But at the end, CNN, all the news papers and TVs descended on us and was talking to us, asking us questions. We're like, oh, whatever. So then this young man comes up to Ruby. He says, when you all finish, the senator would like to see you all in the back. She says, what senator? Barack, Senator Barack Obama. She said, okay, we can leave now. He said, no, continue. Then he comes up to me and says the same thing. I'm like, what senator? Same thing. So then we go to the back, and we had ink pens and everything, just in case we got near him, we could get a signature. Well, do you think anybody thought of it? No. So he comes out, and he thinks he's going to shake hands. We're like, no, we need hugs. So all the ladies got a hug, the men got a handshake, and that's the picture. So this is my story, and I'm sticking to it. And that's the end. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I've got a couple questions, but I know everybody else does. But did your dad get his cane back? I mean,
no, it was a gift.
There you go.
And you know what? It was months later, because this is when he announced. He had just beat Hillary the night before, so he actually announced his run here. So 2 or 3 months later, we go to Martinsville, because he's there. And my dad was there too. And we could tell he saw us in the crowd and everything. But then my dad wasn't feeling well, so I had to take him outside. When he shook Ruby's hand, he said, where's your dad? Oh. You remember?
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was really interesting that out of all of the people that he would meet all over the world, that he actually remembered us and, you know, and asked
about Daddy.
Yeah, asked about Daddy. I thought that was really nice.
So any other questions? And our mom also protested. She just didn't tell the stories.
I particularly like the one about James Crow Esquire, and I thought on that one screen, I wasn't reading fast enough, but did you think about adding redlining, real estate redlining?
I think I may have it in there.
Was it in there?
Yes.
Yeah, because that's the one I'm learning the most about now, was how systemic racism was built into where you could buy and could not buy a house.
Yeah, and I did a presentation on what's going on today with the school systems and showed how it links to what went on during this time. And so in the South, it was, the law was segregation. In the North, you couldn't segregate, but you didn't have to segregate because you did the redlining and you had community schools and everybody, the North is still, school system is still more segregated today than the South because of the redlining.
Thank you.
You had a question?
Well, yeah, I have a couple, but I don't want to.
Oh, no, please.
And a comment as well, but I thoroughly enjoyed hearing your presentation.
Great, thank you.
Also made to feel uncomfortable, but that's just because of the truth, you know. Sometimes that makes someone feel uncomfortable, even though I'm not ignorant of Black history. But anyway, your I think it's your great grandfather, who was
Right here.
well, no, I guess it'd be Charles Maddox. Was he?
Right here.
Was he?
He's the great.
Was he born as a slave, even though he's the son of a free?
1946. He was born in 1846, and so yeah. And that's the other thing. My dad knew his grandparents who had been slaves. It was interesting. Like I said, I did portrayals at Booker T. My dad could not watch slave movies. He did not like the fact that I did portrayals dressed as a slave. He's like, you know, that time was over, which I can understand and feel, but I could see it from a history perspective and need to share it, you know, with other people. But yes, and in my book I talk about with Sam Maddox, because of course Sam had a white family and Sally had a black family, and then they had children together, all of these descendants still live in not all of them. Many of their descendants, black and white, still live in Franklin County, and my white cousins live across the road from me.